apocalyptic prophecies, conspiracy theories, and so forth. All of them aim at stirring up emotions, positive or negative. It's a cycle, the Mayan cycle. The Mayan calendar we're talking about doesn't end. That's all a fear game. It's the cycle that ends. I see no scientific imperative for, nor do I have a personal conviction that would support the prophecy angle. Although I have the highest regard for the work of the Mayan astronomers. This sort of necessary shift in consciousness doesn't just somehow come about on its own. It happens because we work to achieve it.
I am convinced that a change will come about in 2012, but the question is, when is 2012?
Don't panic yet, everyone. 2012.
That's the date that many doomsday prophets are claiming the world as we know it will end.
Ich bin davon überzeugt.
I'm convinced that we're heading towards a dramatic change on this planet. Everything we can observe indicates this. Climate change, overpopulation, food shortages, everything is undergoing an exponential development. And we know that an exponential function climbs even higher until the grade is so steep that the system self-destructs.
Das System sich selber sprengt.
The paradigm shift that is already happening, first in physics. Biology is lagging behind, but it's already happening. It's a move towards a more organic view of nature, a more interconnected view of nature, where we see nature, the whole universe, the earth, and living organisms as organisms, not as machines.
We're abolishing the word explain. Physicists have discovered that nothing can be explained. You can only describe something within a certain framework, which leads you to certain logical, mathematical conclusions, which are in turn interpreted, and the battle is on.
We're developing our inner perception, which has nothing to do with our sense of sight. I don't know exactly when this process will be complete. Some people say in 2012. Could be.
My understanding is that at that point, all possibilities will be open. All possibilities. To go down to hell forever or to go up to heaven or whatever.
When you know that science can't come close to getting a handle on the whole thing, then you know why the press can't report anything serious about it. They only take an interest in what they know, so that the continuity of causality won't be disrupted too much.
(2012). Almost no one is immune to the magnetism of the state. With all the crises and constant outbreak of new conflicts, sinister prophecies fan the fires of apocalyptic angst, while for others, the promise of spiritual renewal gives strength in uncertain times. What bothers me in both scenarios as a scientist is the mood of panic and even hysteria that often gets whipped up. But I do find it remarkable that in many ancient civilizations, this particular year is believed to mark a special turning point. The Maya even refer to it as the final, all-encompassing transition. And that is clearly already well underway, isn't it? we've long since realized that all the current global challenges can only be mastered if we break through established structures and habitual ways of thinking and develop a new awareness. Furthermore, natural scientists are now observing that cosmic influences are having an increasing effect on material, environment, and ourselves, which in turn has a measurable influence on our feelings and perception.
We're already in a different state of awareness now, wide awake, than we were when we just woke up only 3, 4, 5, 6 hours ago. It's a different state of being, which has then expanded to become a higher level of consciousness, a level that allows us to perceive everything differently, including the things we've already lived through. The interaction between you and me changes. The physical separation ceases to exist. The idea that you're over there and I'm here and you're something different. It is the ability to perceive the holistic nature of things. I see that as an outcome of this transformation.
I myself have spent many years focusing on how to scientifically describe how our bioorganism reacts to terrestrial and cosmic influences, electromagnetic fields, for example. The real sensation is that it appears these research data could take on an unprecedented significance for humanity in the period right around 2012 of all times. But that's just one side of the coin, because if our perception changes as dramatically as I suspect is possible, our entire worldview will inevitably be derailed as a result. That's why we should approach everything that happens from here on in with a consciousness of a child, open and unbiased. That will enable us to open up a world in which mathematicians become philosophers and science merges with religion. In this way, we can begin now to overcome the limitations of our consciousness and to breach the boundaries of space and time. To understand why our perception and awareness could soon undergo such a dramatic change, we must first explore a few fundamental questions, namely, what exactly is consciousness? Where is this inexplicable part of our existence located, and what role does our brain play in this context?
And this is one of the most unexplored areas in all of science. It's now one of the most exciting areas. Consciousness studies is a frontier area of science, largely because consciousness itself has been so ignored by scientists for so long. Now, at last, people are looking at this and realizing we know almost nothing about the nature of our own minds and how they relate to our brains. I'm interested in what I call the mysteries of everyday life, things that happen to lots of people, but which science can't explain. One of them is telepathic telephone calls. You think of someone, and then they ring, and then you say, "That's funny, I was just thinking about you." More than 80% of people have had that experience in Europe and America. So it's very common. Another area is the feeling of being stared at. You turn around, somebody's looking at you, or you stare at someone, they turn around. Well, I've had these experiences myself, and again, most people have. The sense of being stared at, about 90% of people have had that experience, in a way that seems to be telepathic. So I've done experiments to find out whether it really is telepathic, and yes, indeed, at least in some cases, it seems to be. The conventional view, the materialist theory of the mind, which is still the dominant theory within academic science, says that the mind is the brain. Mental activity is brain activity. All your thoughts, intentions, and so on are inside your head. What I'm suggesting is they're not all inside your head. They extend beyond your head through fields, which I call morphic fields.
In quantum theory, we talk about statistics and probabilities, and basically about noise. We have a constant background noise that is simply there. What we do with our brain is to pull information out of this noise. In that sense, anything at all can be found in the noise field. So from out of other space-time or non-space-time areas, these information fields control, non-energetically, the activity here on Earth, with the help of processes that occur in our brains.
Our brain. A package of wonders that we haven't even unpacked yet. It's unfathomable, but the number of possible connections in the brain is greater than the number of all the atoms in the entire universe. We know that various messenger substances known as neurotransmitters are responsible for the exchange of information between nerve cells. Minute electrical impulses prompt the nerve cell to discharge these neurotransmitters, which are made up of different specific molecules according to their particular function. It is these molecules that keep our feelings and our lives in rhythm. They control the sleeping and waking phases of the body and trigger euphoria and depression. So far, so good. But this purely biochemical analysis doesn't explain why our feeling of self-identity develops with the accompanying experiences and intuitive events. This is where biology reaches its limits, and consciousness research becomes the subject of a discipline that has historically focused more than any other on measurable characteristics and immutable laws: physics.
Das Charonsche Modell der Elektronen.
Charon's model of electrons, which postulates that they can store memory information in the form of light patterns, is an obvious thread to follow. The idea is that the electrons that have organized a specific biological organism and control all the biochemical, biophysical processes during its lifetime by means of the electromagnetic fields that they generate, that these electrons, or at least a certain hardcore portion of them, are the substance of what we call the human soul.
Was wir als menschliche Seele bezeichnen.
The latest findings on quantum physical phenomena could also be the key to understanding the processes in our synapses. To put it another way, thoughts and experiences are processed in a region where the laws of space and time no longer apply or work completely differently. According to this theory, the brain could be the link to a higher, otherworldly dimension.
What is happening there is that stimuli coming from brain waves are translated into experiential qualities. It's not that brain waves on their own create meaning. How could they? What happens is that the various somatic waves and stimuli on offer, in other words, physical things, are transported up into these areas beyond. This is also the place, if we don't come up with a memory molecule, and I don't think we will, where memory content is stored, in the form of experiential qualities.
Werden Gedächtnisinhalte, und zwar als Erlebnisqualitäten, angelagert.
A good analogy would be something like a cell phone, a handy. In the mobile telephone, there is an electromagnetic field inside the phone, but the field of the phone extends beyond the surface of the phone. It extends over hundreds of meters. And because of that, the phone can have effects at a distance, and it can pick up influences from far away through invisible fields. And I think our minds are like invisible fields that extend beyond our brains. They're not just confined to the inside of the head. If you have a dog and you intend to go home, the dog can pick up that intention even before you get in the car to set off home. And we've done lots of experiments where we film the dog. We have people come home at random times. We have them come home in taxis to rule out familiar car sounds. All these things show that attention and intention can work at a distance. They're not confined to the inside of the head.
Okay, let's go.
Quantum physics has shown us that things are much more interconnected than we previously imagined. And I think this more holistic approach is the way science is going and is bound to continue to go.
All schools of philosophy like to use the ocean as a metaphor for the structure of our consciousness. On the surface, we have the wave. The wave can most certainly experience itself as an individual, yeah. Yet when we look at waves, we would never accept the idea that they are isolated entities. Rather, we see them as fluctuations of a larger whole, namely the ocean.
The limitations lie in our brain and in the programming we've had drummed into us from our earliest years. This system carries an immense inertia factor because we keep reproducing it. We continue to educate new generations of children into this system. And the attempts that we do make to expand the boundaries of the system suffer from the following. It's very difficult for me to move from a limited system into a broader or a wider one. It's much easier the other way round. When I imagine a big funnel with the extended system up at the top, then I'm sitting down at the thin end with my limited brain capacity and my limited abilities. And when they throw a big bundle of hay into the opening up there, only a single straw comes out at my end. That's the state of our limitation, and we'll have to live with it and fight it for some time to come.
So it's not going to be easy to overcome all our entrenched thought patterns and change our consciousness by dint of our own effort. At least, it does seem certain that our brain plays an important role as a control center. It follows that a sweeping transformation of consciousness in 2012 must be accompanied by changes within our brain, which would enable us to perceive previously inaccessible stimuli and correlations. But what could possibly have such an effect on our brain? Long before I posed this question, in connection with the events of the year 2012, I had witnessed several clinical experiments in which we studied the effects of electromagnetic fields on the human brain. Test subjects were exposed to such fields which had been created for the purpose. And our tests showed that their brain waves were in fact influenced by the external waves. This is significant because the brain itself works in different frequencies during different phases of consciousness. In other words, the sleeping and waking phases. Current studies confirm that relative to the strength of the field and frequency level, not only the mood of test persons can be influenced, but their perception, learning ability, and memory as well. Clearly, electromagnetic fields have a decisive influence on our brain function and can rapidly evoke various states of consciousness. So the cause of a revolutionary transformation in our perception could indeed be a colossal electromagnetic field. When astronauts returned from the first manned space flights, experiencing serious health problems, the term space sickness was coined. The cause soon became clear. In their space capsule, the astronauts had been cut off from the Earth's magnetic field. This fact shows with stunning clarity that our Earth's magnetic field does a lot more than just protect us from cosmic radiation. Our entire bioorganism literally harmonizes with this field. It regulates the cycles of life and our body clock, and could even be the engine for many of the metabolic processes, not to mention its significance for the directional sense in both humans and animals. Of course, we cannot perceive the geomagnetic field directly with our five senses, yet we do have the antennas for it. We have at our disposal more than 5 million magnetite crystals per gram of brain mass. They react extremely sensitively to all the magnetic fields in our environment, and very significantly to sudden change. Statistical evaluations are in fact making it clear that disruptions in the geomagnetic field are reflected in just about all areas of life. Birth rate, industrial accidents, death statistics, traffic accidents. The numbers are always way above average on days when extreme geomagnetic activity is recorded. A study commissioned by the U.S. Federal Reserve concluded that even trade on the international stock exchanges is influenced directly by the activity of the geomagnetic field. It now appears certain the geomagnetic field seems to have a decisive effect on our psyche and our biorhythms. What does that mean in relation to the year 2012? For the biophysical and chemical processes in our brain to change in the way that we have observed in our experiments with artificial fields, very dramatic geomagnetic turbulence would have to occur in that year. Is a calculable, perhaps cyclical event actually due to take place precisely during that time period that will have an effect on our planet? We know now that in the history of the Earth, there have been regular incidences of extreme changes to the magnetic field. These things appear to be due to regular cosmic cycles, comparable to the 4 seasons. At this point in the discussion, the Mayan calendar must inevitably enter the equation. According to their calculations, our year 2012 is so special precisely because this is when various cycles end and also begin. It's comparable to a clock face. Once every 12 hours, all 3 hands point to 12 for the short duration of 1 second. So let's take a closer look at the cosmic cycles known today. we are made aware of them most consciously by the alternation of day and night, caused by the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. Indisputably, the most self-evident of all cycles. Just as obvious is the unit of the month. Our moon orbits the Earth once in exactly 28 days. We can clearly observe this in the various moon phases. Our Earth takes 365 days for its journey around the Sun. In other words, 1 year. The sequence of 4 seasons arises over the course of the one cycle due to the slight tilt of our Earth on its axis. The hemisphere tilted towards the Sun is somewhat warmer because the Sun's rays hit it at a sharper angle, and also because the days are significantly longer there than the nights. In this hemisphere, it's summer. But our Earth's axis doesn't always tilt in the same direction. A cycle that can only be observed over millennia is the precession of the equinoxes, also known as a Platonic year. Our Earth wobbles like a slow-spinning top, and it takes around 26,000 years until the Earth's axis tilts in the same direction again. All of these processes, which we can confirm with ultra-modern instruments at best, were already well known to the Maya and form the basis of their cyclical calendar. Thanks to this knowledge, they were able to give each day for centuries ahead its own individual name. That's very important when you assume, as did the Maya, that each day comes with its own particular quality due to the exact cosmic constellation. But returning to the subject of cosmic cycles. Our entire planetary system orbits around the center of our galaxy over an unimaginably long period of time. At the same time, it also oscillates around the galactic equator. In this case, too, the length of time it takes for our planetary system to complete one cycle of rising and sinking is virtually unfathomable in human terms. According to the Mayan calendar, the perfect depiction of cosmic cycles, many such significant cycles are expected to dovetail dramatically in the year 2012, resulting in a constellation so unusual that it will lead to global disasters and the much-discussed higher vibrational level. However, there's almost nothing we can deduce with certainty from the cycles known to us today. Even though some current measurements do seem to support such prophecies, increases in cosmic radiation over many years, for example, the time frame and distance in question are still far too vast to enable us to pin these events down to a certain year, let alone an exact day. And it's completely unnecessary for us to rely on speculation because what is presumably the most significant source of geomagnetic disturbances, in the cosmic sense as well, is glaringly obvious. It is a tiny cog in the wheel of cosmic cycles, yet powerful enough to cause devastating economic and material damage on our planet. And the little cog is our sun.
Vehicle on an international mission of solar physics.
Roll program is in. Vehicle responses look good at this time.
Listening now to Skip Mackey and Central Telemetry here at the Mission Director Center.
All engines look
In December 1995, NASA and ESA launched the SOHO satellite into space. SOHO, which stands for Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, has since then sent us a steady stream of measurement data from the Sun. In 2006, a new era of solar observation quality was ushered in with the dual satellites called STEREO. These two satellites observe the Sun simultaneously from different angles. Like a giant pair of human eyes, the STEREO mission gives us an unprecedented spatial view of our central celestial body. The research focuses on the observation of explosions on the Sun's surface. These solar flares, or eruptions, catapult high-energy charge carriers into space at speeds of several million kilometers per hour.
A coronal mass ejection is the violent expulsion of part of the solar atmosphere that contains both magnetic field and plasma.
Our Earth's magnetic field protects us from these particles, diverting them into a detour around the globe. This causes an effect which we can observe at both of the Earth's poles, known as the Northern Lights. But behind what we experience as a spectacular show of nature lurks an unpleasant shadow.
They can really disrupt satellite communications. They can affect GPS signals, our cell phones. They can even induce a lot of currents in the northern latitudes and even cause electricity disruptions.
The probability of what's called a superstorm is especially high in the year 2012. NASA's solar researchers have classified the maximum solar activity expected during this time period as so dangerous that in 2009, they began to issue official warnings about its possible damaging effects. Just stirring up panic? Statistics show a clear parallel at all times between population rates on Earth and sunspot activity. A further indication of the strong corollary between the reactions of our climate and all biological life on Earth to solar cycles. And another thing. On the morning of September 1st, 1859, British astronomer and sun researcher Richard Carrington happened, by coincidence, to observe a blazing explosion on the surface of the Sun. He knew at once that he had witnessed a very special event. In the nights that followed, brilliant northern lights could be seen all over the globe, as far from the poles as Hawaii and Jamaica. This particularly severe magnetic storm disabled the telegraph network worldwide and caused the paper in the teletype machines to burst into flames. That was 1859. For our modern, high-tech world, a solar superstorm would doubtless deal a heavy blow. Power outages and the resulting disruption of supply chains, governments the world over are preparing more or less for such a scenario. But the possible effects on our bioorganism have largely been ignored thus far. Should we take the ancient prophecies of a quantum leap in consciousness seriously, after all? And not so much in terms of mystic or spiritual parameters, but quite pragmatically, from a biochemical, biophysical standpoint. This is underscored by a simple example. Imagine that someone were to give you, without your knowledge, a consciousness-expanding drug. As soon as the substance takes effect, you would begin to believe you were losing your mind, because you would start to feel and perceive things that are not part of reality as you know it. If, on the other hand, you were to take the drug on purpose, fully aware of its effect, it would not take you by surprise. You would be prepared for it and able to make sense of the effect. One step at a time. Our brain, as the interface to our consciousness, is also a high-performance filter. The sensory organs deliver around 1 million times more information to the brain than it passes on to our consciousness. Our brain decides how relevant a particular sensory impression is for our survival. According to this prioritizing, we are then either able to perceive it or not. Tranquilizers allow only the strongest stimuli to reach our consciousness perception. Some psychoactive substances have just the opposite effect. Cannabis, for example, disrupts the ability of the visual system to block out superfluous views of the surroundings. But hallucinations, such as those induced by hashish consumption, are not delusions. Rather, they are hyper-realistic, uncensored images one after the other, just as our brain constantly registers them, but without forwarding them on to our consciousness. LSD is another drug known for its consciousness-expanding effects. Under the influence of LSD, the ability to perceive time and space is lost within just a few seconds. The human brain produces a neurotransmitter, a molecule very similar to LSD. It's called dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. But it seems that even the tiniest amount of these molecules can trigger hallucinations in sensitive individuals. Various experiments have also shown that exposure to certain electromagnetic fields and frequencies can stimulate the brain to release DMT molecules. Such fields have the same strength and frequencies as what we might be exposed to during severe geomagnetic storms. Is it not plausible that our brain is already equipped with all the prerequisites for an expanded consciousness? And that this, let's call it function, need only be activated by the release of certain messenger substances, such as DMT? Molecules that weaken the limitations on our perception, or even dissolve them altogether?
It is as though we will be shown things the way they really are for the first time. To use a metaphor, our blinders will be removed.
This is how we think of outer space. Innumerable spots of light in a sea of endless black emptiness. But we have known for some time now that this infinite vastness isn't so empty after all. It must contain something that we can neither see nor measure, because the familiar visible material phenomena alone cannot explain the movements of the stars and galaxies. And this dark matter must be omnipresent. Its particles permeate our planet and us without leaving a single trace. We still have only vague suspicions about the nature of this phenomenon. There are a multitude of things that we now know must exist, although they lie beyond the realm of direct measurement and observation.
Research by astrophysicists over the last 60 years has shown that invisible dark matter and dark energy account for 95% of all mass. This reduces what is visible to us to about 4 to 5%, which we break down to atoms. This is the only kind of matter we can see. That's not very much.
We call it dark matter because we can't see it. But it reveals itself through its gravitational interactions with ordinary matter, which is what we can observe with telescopes. When one piece of dark matter meets another piece of dark matter, they may annihilate each other and produce gamma rays. And so what we're going to look for are the gamma rays from that dark matter annihilation.
If you look at an X-ray of me, I don't look like this. I appear as a skeleton. And if you look at me in infrared rays, I look like a cloud. Therefore, visibility depends very much on the wavelength and which frequency we're using to observe things.
When you look up in the optical sky, it looks very quiescent and stable and nothing changing with time. When you look at the gamma ray sky, you realize that there are violent phenomena in the universe that evolve very quickly. Gamma ray bursts being an example, something that for a brief instant of time, about a second, outshines the entire rest of the universe.
Those familiar with the Mayan material will at this point be reminded of the galactic synchronization ray, which it is thought will raise our vibrational level in 2012. But let's stick to more tangible things at this stage.
In a way, we're really blind. And in my view, this blindness will collapse. This is clearly a radical shift where perception is concerned. But it has nothing to do with world destruction. It is our minds that are linked to the electromagnetic field that will collapse. Scientists have proven this. The good news is we will not die because we are not our minds. We're much more than that. We don't just see with our eyes, but with our bodies, because we have inner senses. What's happening is that we are expanding our experiential capacities.
But how would we react if we were suddenly flooded with millions of new stimuli? If perceptions were to penetrate our consciousness that we are unable to classify because we've never experienced them?
Look, how could someone, let's say 300 or 400 years ago here in Western Europe, possibly imagine the room we are sitting in now with all its equipment? It's just absurd. It's not possible. There have been one or two people, big names, who have had precognitive visions of inventions, yes. But an exact image of us sitting here receiving pictures from America, that film material is being shot, that will then be available in some modified form or other to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. That's unimaginable. I think that's the same position we're in now.
I was always struck by the Romans at the end of their empire when they said, if the Vandals come and destroy and attack us, it will be the end of civilization. Well, I mean, you look back now and you say, what kind of horrible civilization did they have, really? Thank God the Vandals came and wiped them out. Otherwise, who would want to be stuck in that mindset? You know, it was horrible. It's the same now. We're so, oh my God, if something happens, we'll lose our civilization. What civilization have we got now to crow about, you know?
Without a doubt, our economic and social systems are coming apart at the seams. We debate daily about environmental protection and the necessity of doing away with hunger and poverty in the world, but we're going in circles, trying to protect the environment and using up more resources in the process, helping the poor and hindering them at the same time from escaping poverty on their own initiative. All the while, our instinct tells us that nothing can change as long as our worldview stays the same. So we need ever more new solutions for problems that were the result of solutions to other problems in the first place. We've never really learned to let go and recognize the causes.
All our belief systems were very, very restrictive. All the church had the power of death, life and death and so on. Science was supposed to be our saving grace, and it's becoming very dogmatic as well now in a similar way. And the application of science are seriously dangerous. So we've got all this to come out of, you know, and people think this is all there is, and they used to be constricted.
Science is a dogma, of course. It's become dogmatic. Just look how scientists react when you confront them with unconventional work. They either throw up their hands and walk away, or close their eyes and say, now the bad dog can't see me anymore. But the dog can see just fine.
Die ganze Arbeit der Wissenschaft ist ja darauf.
The whole focus of scientific work is to communicate certainties. Not truth, certainties. People feel safe within certainties.
And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to just suddenly let go of that and be free and be able to function in a different reality. They won't want to, probably, most of them, a lot of them won't want to.
It's just a matter of time because the younger generations are more open than the older ones. As Max Planck said, for such paradigm shifts to occur, you have to wait until old ones die out for the young ones to do things differently.
The problem is that biologists and physicists don't meet on common ground. Each discipline has its own language, its own vocabulary, and that often results in disagreements. For example, Rupert Sheldrake speaks about a kind of life force he calls a morphogenetic field. I think it's the same thing as what I and other physicists would call an electroweak field.
Belief is very limiting. It limits you because you begin to think that what you believe in is the only thing that can exist. And that's not true. So belief is limiting. Beyond belief is liberating, but it's very difficult to achieve because we need security. We need, like you say, nuts and bolts. We need to flesh it out. We need to see something solid. Beyond belief, you are actually in a position where every possibility is open.
How open are we really for something we don't believe in?
We just don't want them. We don't want to know. We don't want to have them on our lands. End of story. It comes on this land. It could be a wake-up call. But no, they get angry, they resent it, they want to cut it, and on top of that, they don't want to know anything about them. They just don't want the stuff. I don't want to know, you know? And a lot, unfortunately, that's how it is.
As a physicist, I have to say that it still appears to be an anomaly because we have not been able to find any energetic carriers that could account for the existence of these voices, or that we can classify in terms of conventional scientific method.
What can't be understood theoretically and can't be controlled remains outside the scientific mainstream. That's all of parapsychology. Uri Geller can bend all the spoons he wants. Conventional science can't accept him.
Yes, there are several good examples of events that we simply ignore because of our ingrained convictions, although we can perceive them with all the senses available to us today, even measure and photograph them. We refuse to admit that they have any relevance for our modern, clued-in life.
These are military radar reports. These blue lines here usually indicate commercial aircraft, passenger planes. But here between them is something that does not behave at all like an airplane, beyond a doubt. But it's the same as with parapsychology. The evidence should actually be enough in a court of law anyway to confirm the existence of all paranormal phenomena. But conventional science does not examine this phenomenon. There are certain individuals who take an interest, some sent by the military to analyze some particular things. But it never becomes bona fide scientific subject matter, and it never will. They only concern themselves with things they know won't disturb the causal sequence too much. It's the same with consciousness research. We suspect that it's beyond our capacity, so we won't even touch it. You'll just earn yourself a bad name among colleagues.
After many discussions such as these, I came to the conclusion that what we now call paranormal is probably just the tip of an iceberg. Excerpts and messengers from a world that we can't yet perceive or understand in the slightest. One faction of physicists is still busy trying to bring the many surprising and unexplained characteristics of elementary particles into harmony with established laws and standard models. But some of their colleagues have long since left these limitations behind, and in the process discovered a world in which mathematics and natural sciences can indeed describe much that has previously been the exclusive prerogative of religion and philosophy. The only bitter pill? These theories are so far away from everything we've learned thus far that now, well, before we attempt this little excursion into the world of new physics, you should try to free your consciousness completely, at least temporarily, from everything you've learned up until today.
What is consciousness? That's the main question. In my view, consciousness is an integral state of the body. There are three kinds of forces: gravity, electromagnetic interaction, and nuclear force. And we have three bodies that have three different kinds of matter. I think consciousness is the totality of them all.
The classic four-dimensional space-time continuum, as Albert Einstein basically introduced it into modern physics, won't do it for us. It doesn't account for all particle characteristics.
You cannot describe the movements of particles in 3 dimensions. We need many more. This applies both on the cosmic level and in microcosm. We need many more dimensions than 3.
We biological life forms basically have free access to a 3-dimensional space. But it appears the layers above that, the hyperspaces, can be accessed only with phase changes to a higher consciousness. That's the threshold on which humankind is now poised.
To actually experience this level, we have to be able to cross over, or transcend the level of our normal waking or quotidian consciousness. From that perspective, every meditation is transcendental in nature. In other words, we cross over consciousness levels that still have to do with form and content and individuation, and reach a formless, empty, universal level of consciousness. That doesn't mean everyone has to start to meditate. Rather, that the social environment starts to display phenomena indicating a greater degree of ease or harmony in society.
It's a revelation of the true reality that we do not see today.
Okay, folks, imagine you're sitting in a big cinema and different films are all running simultaneously. Each film is shown in one particular color and you're supplied with different pairs of eyeglasses. When you put the red pair on, you can see everything in the red film, and when you put the green pair on, etc., etc. So you only ever see one particular film according to the glasses you put on. In other words, according to the level of consciousness you take on or concentrate on. But they're all running parallel. They're all there at the same time, if you will, and that's where things get tricky. If each film is running, what does simultaneously mean? Each one is running, but that's just our experience. In reality, all of them are present. And then imagine the films have come to an end, and you all leave the cinema, and you realize that it's all just illusion. Everything is just worlds of worlds within worlds, which are also connected to each other, because something like crosstalk exists from one world to the next. That includes the sort of reincarnative memories that can be tapped into a trance state or through hypnosis.
Human consciousness is at a great threshold. It is in transit from three-dimensional space to hyperdimensional space. The other significant shift is the transition from linear time, that is, from the past to the future, to multidimensional time. This is why we're heading toward the end of time, which, in my view, is actually the beginning of eternity.
At the end of the last century, someone discovered a way of getting a scientific grasp on eternity. Physicist Burkhard Heim developed a theory that made it possible to observe the world holistically with all its material and non-material processes. Postulating a 12-dimensional worldview, he succeeded not just philosophically, but in a mathematically calculable model in uniting the two aspects of life that have been dogmatically separated for centuries: matter and spirit.
That model is actually directed more at people with a science background, who appreciate the method of accepting something as presented without tacking any additional speculations onto it. The tradition that you only believe what you can measure and confirm, so you can feel certain in your knowledge.
But how can we imagine a 12-dimensional world? Let's say that our life as we know it all takes place in a computer. We are all characters in a virtual 3-dimensional reality, a computer game, for example. Everything around us, colors, forms, objects, is 3-dimensional. All sequences and variations are programmed in a single time ray. As long as we don't interrupt the game, time passes in the linear fashion we are familiar with from our reality. Einstein called this virtual environment, with 4 dimensions, including time, the space-time continuum. It is the world of our conscious experience. Burkhard Heim combined these dimensions in one space, or Raum in German, called R4. Remember, we're still talking about a computer here, so for anything at all to happen, we first need an operating system, the prerequisite for running any program. In Heim's model, the equivalent of the operating system would be what he calls structured space. X5 and X6 is what he calls the 2 dimensions that comprise structured space.
Here, space and time already cease to play a role. Now, everyone would agree that without an operating system, the computer would be worthless. We wouldn't be able to play our game, in other words, to live our virtual world. For that, the computer needs additional data, the program itself, as well as numerous files, in which the visual appearance and the laws of our virtual world are pre-assigned and configured. All this information can be accessed at any time in the operating system's root directories. In Heim's model, these are the information spaces comprised of the dimensions x7 and x8. And finally, the computer itself has to be located somewhere too. It accounts for dimensions x9 to x12. In our model, this space is designation G4. It is the realm of the Creator, the omnipresent higher consciousness.
What we have here is basically the theoretical model for Rupert Sheldrake's findings. His practical work has ascertained that there is something called morphogenetic structures. He calls them morphic fields, although the term field isn't suitable here.
Burkhard Heim helps us to a certain extent in that he worked out his first theory on the basis of 6 dimensions. The higher dimensions, in other words, the upper 4, 12, 11, 10, and 9, cannot be grasped semantically, that is, in terms of their meaning. They're mathematical structures, higher symmetries, jokingly referred to as GAB, the German acronym for God only knows. We can't access them. On the other hand, meaning can be assigned through to the 6th and even the 7th and 8th dimensions. We have our 3 normal spatial dimensions. The 4th, which crosses over into the realm of the imagination, is the temporal dimension. Then we have 2 that lie in the realm of information, you could say.
Im Bereich der Information würde man einfach sagen.
Of course, that has major consequences for our whole worldview. Science, for the first time, allows for the possibility of existence without a physical body.
Leibfreie Existenzen geben kann.
If we discover that it's possible for an electron to cross over into a different dimension, then we'll be able to describe, for example, post-mortal states. In other words, life after death.
Of course, that's something completely different from our conventional definition of life. What we're talking about here is pure existence.
What we're now seeing is that today's modern physics is possibly laying the scientific foundation for the spiritual experiences that people have been reporting for hundreds and thousands of years.
All paranormal phenomena, in fact, can be explained using this model. Just one example is psychokinesis. Uri Geller can bend spoons, everyone knows that. So we have to say he's not quite normal, because normal is what the majority can do and does. But in his case, the channels that access the brain from out of these trans-dimensions, the higher levels, aren't completely leak-proof. They're not quite solid. In this case, the will can bypass the cortex and reach directly into this other space. So I can imagine that there are some people, and this is said to be so, who have dissolved certain barriers. These are the people we call mediums, those who can see into the other side. Parapsychological studies have shown that when you get a group of mediums together, they all see the same thing. In that scenario, those of us without medial abilities, I don't have them, are the anormal ones. The mediums are normal because they're in the majority, and they can see things I can't see. But this particular worldview model allows us to trust the mediums because they are, in fact, confirming exactly what the theory postulates.
Take evolution. It too is a theory that cannot be proven, but we have basically internalized it as a fact. I try to imagine how different our modern rational world would be if the theory of a certain Burkhardt-Heim were just as embedded in our collective certainty.
The first clear repercussion is that I am thoroughly conscious of the fact that I'm six-dimensional. Because if all particles are six-dimensional, then so am I. And then I have to infer what being six-dimensional means when the three-dimensional reality is gone, the physical body. I can live in hope that the other structures will still remain on some level. But that's something I will only be able to experience post-mortem.
Was postmortem dann erst erfahren werden könnte.
What would happen if future generations grew up not in the belief, but with the certainty that the soul, with all its experiences, exists for eternity in another dimension beyond space and time? What values and priorities would take precedence if we were to switch off one of humanity's most powerful engines, the fear of death? I have to admit that I already see many things with different eyes now than at the start of my scientific career. But even though I myself allow for the fact that apparently nothing is impossible in our world, a certain amount of healthy skepticism is still always advisable. The following phenomenon is a good example. On the one hand, it's easy to fake. On the other hand, it is good evidence for a world according to Burkhardt-Heim. For my part, I have not yet come to any final conclusion, but I think that we will gain more clarity from 2012 on. But take a look for yourself.
They began doing experiments quite some time ago in England in what are known as Faraday cages, which are enclosed spaces that electromagnetic waves can't penetrate. The voices emerged in the presence of the technicians, who were considered to be the top secret service and military radar technicians of their day. These people explained quite clearly, explained in quotes, that they couldn't explain it. So it's a phenomenon that lies outside the realm of physics as we know it, and it's apparently not an energetic phenomenon at all, or there would be some measurable electromagnetic waves or something. So it's not due to mechanical vibrations either. And they succeeded back then in recording 20-30 voices under controlled conditions. The experimenter asks, "What time period do you live in?" Answer, "In no time. Time is not present." The experimenter asks another communicator, "Where are you?" "Where are you calling me from?" Answer, "In being. To be is to experience. To experience is to exist, whenever, wherever, or however it happens, because everything happens right now." It's a recording of a radio broadcast, and the voice of the radio presenter can be heard in the background.
Wo sind Sie? Von wo rufen Sie mich? Leben ist erfahren.
Es ist also etwas Außergewöhnliches oder
So it's something extraordinary, or an anomaly. It really belongs to the larger arena of paraphysics or paranormology, because it contravenes certain norms that we, meaning the portion of humanity here in the West, have established over the last few hundred years. So now something happens that's not supposed to be able to happen. There's no apparent cause for it. That's the more scientific or technical component. The other one is, of course, the human view of the topic.
betrachtet vom menschheitlichen her. Und da glaube ich persönlich, dass es wichtig ist.
Personally, I believe that it's important to take this aspect as an indication, not as evidence, but as an indication that life continues after death. In over 20 countries now, simple attempts have been made to record these types of voices on tape. And when they get something that can be more or less verified, in other words, that is not in the realm of illusion or hallucination, many people feel very comforted when they hear the message of a deceased relative or loved one on tape.
Einen Trost entnehmen, wenn Sie eine Meldung eines verstorbenen Angehörigen oder eines geliebten Menschen da auf dem Band hören. Also die menschliche Seite.
In other words, the human side of the equation touches on one of the fundamental problems of our existence. We are here, we don't know where we come from or exactly where we're going, but we can use these indications as support for the hope that life does go on.
Another phenomenon, far more concrete than the voices from beyond, and the subject of numerous major films, will be much easier to evaluate when we have finally overcome the mental limitations of our time.
These are some photos I can stake my name on. This is what we've already developed, but we're a good bit further in the meantime. This was all developed earlier, with a bit of donation money, without a cent from any official department or foundation. We now have an automatic surveillance system. It's all a lot more compact now, and we have succeeded in recording something unknown now and then. Here you can see it again, a little more distinctly. At first, we assumed this phenomenon could perhaps be explained according to C.G. Jung's work, as inner psychic projections, archetypes that are projected into the external world. We stopped following that thread as soon as we were able to measure physical interactions with these so-called hallucinations. So that wasn't it. There was another idea that they could be, some sort of invention, from the Nazis even, or the Chinese, or someone or other. But the characteristics speak against it. The thing is very slow. The points come every 10 seconds or so, densely enough that you can estimate it's flying at 200 kilometers an hour. That's not very fast. And then suddenly, zap, it takes a big leap at supersonic speed, 1 kilometer a second, and picks up again over here. That's 3 times the speed of sound. At this point, it is no longer registered. The equipment switched off at that point, because aircraft couldn't possibly move at such speeds, at least according to the military back then. The military always tried to shoot these objects down, or to shoot at them to force them to land, but they don't do that. All that in connection with the scientific question, if they are extraterrestrials, where do they come from, and why do they stay just 5 minutes or a quarter of an hour on Earth, and then they're gone? That's an insult to our intelligence. Then the idea arose that they could be time travelers. Maybe we're being visited from the future. But the physicists all concluded that there would be time paradoxes. You could fly back into your own future and kill your grandfather. What would happen then? You wouldn't exist. But these paradoxes were solved about 15 years ago by Dolce and Gibbs Horn and Stephen Hawking. So that's not the case. There are 2 possibilities. If someone were to do that, the dimensions would either subdivide again, or the other, more reasonable solution, which I'm a proponent of, which is that what didn't happen doesn't exist. If someone comes along and wants to kill his grandfather, something will happen to prevent it. He can't do it. Future generations will laugh their heads off over the stupid 21st century population that, despite mounting evidence in support of this phenomenon, has less and less knowledge about it and doesn't even try to acquire it. On the contrary, the general public just laughs and feels vindicated. Otherwise, science would be saying something about it. It's a misconception. And maybe it's a good thing. And here I have to take up the cudgels for someone, although I risk awakening more interest in the truth, and certainty should always take precedence over truth. Who would want to get in a plane with Nobel Prize winner Wolfgang Pauli, whose presence was known to cause the breakdown of all electrical systems? Who would want to be a fellow passenger? Once he just looked too hard at a car and it spontaneously burst into flames. It's not talked about because, well, a physics Nobel Prize laureate just doesn't do such things. Okay, so as soon as you say such things don't exist, then you have your certainty and you can get on the plane, and that's the right approach. But if you know the truth, you become anxious, and I don't want that. So in that sense, it's not such a good idea for the public to know too much about paranormal phenomena.
But what happens when a paranormal phenomenon is so real that you have plenty of time to thoroughly inspect it? Every year, tens of thousands of people visit a small region in southern England. They are interested in the symbols of ancient cultures, in mathematics and higher symmetries, elementary physics, and rare planetary constellations.
To illustrate it anecdotally, we had this crop formation that clearly depicted a planetary system. But at first we didn't know what it was. What I did was to find a computer program capable of reading planetary constellations. After a few tries, I realized I was getting nowhere, that it would take forever if I kept that up day in, day out. Then I had the idea of trying the first prominent date that occurred to me. December 21st, 2012. I entered it, and bingo, it fits.
Other crop formations, too, contain references to the year, or at least the number 2012, in the form of ancient symbolism, including Mayan. With everything I now know, I would not put that down to coincidence. So, what's going on here?
Crop formations present a particular challenge because they can be reproduced. Crop circle artists have succeeded in trampling things into the fields that experts have confirmed to be real, even justified it on camera. And then the people who have made it appeared with film footage documenting how they had done it. So I'm very cautious here, and the subject remains outside our main field of study. There are only a few individual philosophers and curious scientists who go out on their own initiative and, using scientific methods, confirm that this phenomenon exists.
Regardless of what I think about it, I can't just deny it or rationalize it away. It's something I can visit, examine, take measurements of, and even meditate on. In other words, I can perceive it with all my senses.
Crop circles are beyond beliefs. It's not a question of belief. You know, you have the evidence, it teaches you something. It's nothing to do with belief. I don't believe in crop circle. I study them. It's different.
I have yet to find a real correlation between an unidentified flying object and this phenomenon. There is film material showing lights appearing over grain fields, and you see how the grain then bends over by itself. But no one knows if it's faked or not. But that's always the problem. We need to maintain some doubt about all of these things. You can't just take things at face value. It all has to be examined.
Für bare Münze nehmen, sondern wir müssen das alles immer prüfen.
We have to be very careful to distinguish between an assumption and an evidence. And I try with Crop Circle to remain purely in evidence. What they mean, what they look like, what they refer to, where they come from, no one knows. We have no evidence where they come from. We don't know. There is evidence, they appear instantly. It's, to me, that would indicate more an interdimensional situation than an extraterrestrial situation, you know? I think it's done from a consciousness which is on a higher level. They want to reach as many people as possible who would not normally be born with that desire. It triggers something. People have a desire to go in, and they go in, and then they feel the energy because it has energy. You know, it's measurable, and people feel good in there, and they lie down and they feel comfortable. And it's like we're being tuned to a different reality now. You know, you can find it in everything and everybody, and therefore you're not frightened of people. You're able to communicate with people and so on. And to open the universe to the earth, we need to become more universal in our way of thinking. And the crop circles do that. If you're open to them, if you really try to get the message.
Whether or not we can correctly identify the patterns and significance of crop formations, they most certainly have the effect on our subconscious intended by their creators. And besides, the most important message these phenomena relate is completely independent of their specific content and is directed impartially at all viewers.
Question your beliefs. That belief does not equate reality. And reality is potential, and potential is infinite. And we can make any reality we want. Really.
Imagine the films have come to an end, and you all leave the cinema, and you realize that it's all just illusion. Everything is just worlds of worlds within worlds, which are also connected to each other, because something like crosstalk exists from one world to the next.
Looking back at the past, we see that in thousands of years, no system has managed to bring us into a, let's say, more socially cohesive structure. Whether we're talking about laws or religion or all sorts of worldviews, nothing has ever really worked. It's not about applying pressure from outside, telling people, you have to do this, just realize it already. But it is a process of realization. It isn't just about suspecting and believing and hoping. In that sense, to perceive what really is means to realize that we are in fact all one.
We actually destroyed everything for our children now. Is that civilization? Why are we hanging on to it?
Klimawandel.
Climate change, overpopulation, food shortages, economic problems, natural resources plundered, and on and on. Many things are way out of balance, and these developments all seem exponential.
I don't think we can go ahead at that speed with the old system. We will burn to a frazzle. Everybody will just completely explode in our mind, you know? So it's by necessity. We will have to decide, which route we want to take. We can't carry the luggage, all that luggage with us, all the debts that we have, the commitments that we have, trying to keep up with the technology. We will burn ourselves out.
Ich bin auch davon überzeugt, dass wir
I'm convinced that within the lifespan remaining to us, we will very possibly experience such a severe phase transition. But I don't see it as an inevitable catastrophe heading our way, rather as a phase change that is most likely necessary so that we can return to a more healthy management of our resources.
Our inner perception is in a state of evolution.
I believe today it's because science has come so far that we are able to make such a phase change in our consciousness.
Some think it'll happen in 2012. Could be.
I firmly anticipate that from all the traditions that I've studied. And at that point, all possibilities will be open, good and bad.
The heart of the matter is that we don't just have one future. It's possible that there are many futures. And there's not just one past. There are many of them. The present is the moment when we can make choices. I choose freedom.
We're not treating each other very nicely, and they are showing great wisdom, and they're gently guiding us to look at the phenomena and make choices. And I think that the first things that they're asking us to look at is what we're doing to each other as a consciousness on the planet before we engage with a consciousness that is maybe higher.
When you relate on yourself, you relate with anybody. But if you only accept a certain color of human beings, a certain language of human beings, a certain way of dressing of a human being, a certain education, we've got so many conditions. We don't like him because he lives in the wrong part of town, drives the wrong car, he doesn't wear the right shades, sun shades, he doesn't have this, doesn't have that. So you end up with you don't like anybody.
The word has fallen into disrepute, yet the world is awash with it. The word, of course, is love.
Love is the most powerful force of nature. So why don't scientists manage to find love? I think they use means that are simply incapable of recognizing this force. They apply mathematics, which can't measure love, and they use artificial instruments that don't register love. But our minds, and especially our bodies, can contain love completely.
But there's always those who they just can't let go because they're too scared, and they think that there is only one possibility, and it's the one they know.
I think many people have already made up their minds whether they want to take part in this change or not.
The roads will split in humanity. There will be some who will hang on, like grim death, and others will say, I'm going with the earth, I'm going to follow the rhythm of the earth.
In conclusion, only one question remains. If we already suspect that our world is not what we believe it to be, that our consciousness is more than our brain, and that everything is connected to everything else, why should we wait for a cosmic event to bring us love and harmony? After all, right now, today, we all have not only the capacity but also the responsibility to change our world with our thoughts and our actions, each one of us, in every moment.